Friends, we gather together this afternoon to celebrate the life and to honor the memory of Stanlee Fried. Stanlee's family very much appreciates your presence here with them this afternoon, which offers them a great deal of comfort and support. Adonai ma'adam v'teda ehu ben enosh v'chashvehu. O Lord, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you are mindful of us? We are like a breath, our days are like a passing shadow. We come and we go like grass, which in the morning shoots up renewed, in the evening it fades and it withers. You cause us to turn to dust, saying, "Return, you mortal creatures." Would that we were wise, that we understood whither we are going. For when we die, we carry nothing away, our glory does not accompany us. Mark the wholehearted and behold the upright. They shall have peace. Let us join now together in the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Esa'enai el heharim me'ayin yavo Ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai oseh shemayim va'aretz. I lift mine eyes unto the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. Yea, the protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian. God is your protection at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. God will guard you from all harm. God will guard your soul, your going and your coming, now and forever. Kohelet, the author of the biblical book of Ecclesiastes, reminds us that for everything there is a season, a time for every experience under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to dance, a time to grieve and a time to laugh, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. I knew Stanlee Fried, not real well, but from time to time over most of my life. My father, Harold, and Stanlee's older brother, Jimmy, both of blessed memory, were best friends from childhood. My Uncle Larry, of blessed memory, and my Aunt Ethel were longtime dear friends and business colleagues of Stanlee and Shirley. And so Stanlee was always a presence for me. But you didn't have to know Stanlee well or for a long time to know, as soon as you met him, that he was a rare and a special person. You knew from his handshake and from the way he looked you in the eye. You knew from the words he spoke, gentle words, inviting words, words that uncannily reflected authenticity, words mirrored on his gentle face. You knew from his words and from his demeanor that here was a quietly remarkable person. When Stanlee first learned of his illness some 6 years ago, he called me and we spoke. The conversation was not long and it was not deep, and it certainly wasn't maudlin or overly emotional. But I remember it, and it touched me. Stanlee told me about his diagnosis, and he told me, without bathos and without bravado, that he was going to fight and that he was going to live. He told me that he had had a wonderful life, a life filled with everything a person needed to be happy, to be contented. He told me how much he loved his wife of, at this point, almost 30 years, Shirley. He told me about his children, all of whom he adored, and how blessed he was to have them, and about his cherished grandchildren and his dear friends and all the travel that he and Shirley undertook together. And what was so moving about this conversation and about the other conversations that I subsequently had with him, and as recently as several days ago, was the easeful way with which he spoke. Nothing forced, nothing fabricated, nothing phony, nothing false. It was just Stanlee being Stanlee, totally direct, at ease with himself, facing life's challenges with buoyancy and optimism and grace and humor. Stanlee's family drew a loving portrait of their husband, father, father-in-law, grandfather, and uncle when I met with them last evening. Praise poured forth from them so fast and so energetically, and so many voices all at once, that even the most skilled stenographer could not have kept up. They told me that Stanlee was caring and giving, that he had an indomitable spirit, a spirit which tended sometimes toward stubbornness, that he looked at the world through rose-colored glasses, and he never blamed anyone for anything, and that he instinctively understood and appreciated both the foibles and the glories of human nature. They told me that he was a connector and not a divider, that he was warm and loving and made plain to anyone he met that at that moment he or she was the most important person in the world. When Stanlee talked with you, his focus was on you and not on himself. "How are you doing, Stanlee?" someone would ask. And here was his typical reply: "More important, how are you doing?" Even when he wasn't doing well, he shunned complaining and shifted the focus back to you. And he really listened to you and remembered what you said. When during his last weeks, a hospice worker came in to do something for him, Stanlee would take the time to inquire about his or her life. And when that individual came back into his room sometime later, Stanlee would tell a visitor all about that person, his name, the names of his or her family, and what he had learned about that person's life, really a stranger to him. His interest in you, in other words, was not perfunctory, it wasn't phony, or simply a way to ingratiate himself. His expressed interest and his genuine interest were one. And when a hospice person came in to do something difficult or challenging, perhaps painful for Stanlee, it was Stanlee who would apologize and say that he was sorry that this person had to put him or herself out for him. He handled those last years and even those last moments with dignity and with grace. "Are you in pain?" a visitor would ask him. "How can I be in pain?" he would reply, "when my life has been so filled with happiness." And you will soon hear from members of his family all about their beloved Stanlee. And what you will hear are not generalities, but stories, particular stories about specific incidents that tell us who Stanlee Fried really was. Stanlee's relationships were living relationships, relationships that were constantly nurtured through constant contact. And let me now list all of those family members whom Stanlee adored. His beloved wife and dear companion of almost 35 years, Shirley. All his many children, Eric and Shelley, Lorna and Howard, Mark and Victoria, Ian and Michelle, and Alicia. His cherished grandchildren, Travis and Noah and Olivia, and Grant and Aaron and Maya and Barack and Sarah and Joey. His treasured brothers, Jimmy and Morty, and his sister-in-law, Rhea, and his sister-in-law, Judy. His devoted nieces and nephews, Richie and Judy, and Denny and Richard, and many adoring aunts, uncles, and cousins. When a huge presence departs from our lives, a huge sadness takes its place, as it has now. Stanlee would understand this, but he would at the same time, and gently, and with conviction, encourage us to do what we already know how to do, to move the sadness to some degree into the background and find ways to rejoice in our lives, in our opportunities, and in one another. Those of us who knew and loved Stanlee Fried know how lucky we are to have had him in our life for so long. Zichrono livracha, Stanlee Fried's memory will always be our blessing. Amen. I would now like to call on Rabbi Akiva Feinstein, who will reflect on the person that he knew.
I'll start by saying that it's, on one hand, very easy to talk about Stanlee because he was our friend and we loved him and we knew him and he was so open to us. But it's also not so easy to talk about him because we miss him greatly. And he's one of those people, as Rabbi Klein mentioned, bigger than life. He's so many different things. And he was the experience. He was the person. He was the human being. He wasn't a bunch of different adjectives. He was as real and as human as you can get. So we'll try to describe him and try to say things about him. But the main thing about him is that which you can't say. The fact he was with us. He was a great friend, a great father, and a great grandfather. And I come here, as a chaplain in the Montefiore Hospice program. And it's kind of funny because we had to call him our patient. But he wasn't our patient, He was our friend. He was our teacher. He was our strengthener. He was that man that didn't make any sense. That all the textbook descriptions of his illness and all the things he was supposed to do, his body wasn't supposed to do in the last few weeks of his life, which he somehow did, he didn't make a lot of sense to us. He was very amazing and very unbelievable and very humble at the same time. So it's not an easy job. But I just wanted to share a few reflections that I had, things that I learned about him, from him. I learned that he was in the ceramics business. I don't know how to describe what his business was, because he talks a little about himself, at least in the business side, that I wasn't clear what it was he did, but something with beautiful objects and plates and ceramics. But I did learn that his job required him to look at everything with a great eye, with great detail and appreciation. But what's funny is that I could picture him looking at a beautiful set of china, but I could picture him more easily looking at a person. He could look at a person, any person, no matter what the situation was, and just see how beautiful that person was. The person had so much inherent greatness. And he could see inside of everyone so much greatness, and he just smiled. I think all of us will just remember the warmth of his face and his big smile and his handshake. And just when you would see him for the first time, he was just so happy. There's so few people in this world who are just happy before you say a word. You know, people get happy when you tell them a story. You can tell them you're going to give them a gift. You get to know them. But who's happy when you first meet them, that first second, just because there's another human being in the room? And that was Stanlee. The thing about him was that he knew a lot. He had a lot of wisdom. He had the power of great advice. But he could somehow learn from everyone. Whether you were a PhD or you were a sixth grader, he could learn something from you. He felt you were an expert in something, and he needed to know it. He was excellent at asking all the right questions, getting to know what you knew the best, what you loved the most, and when you zoomed in on that particular thing, he wanted to become your student. He wanted to learn as much as he could about that which you had to offer. The thing about Stanlee, the reason he could be like this tremendous student, was that he was tuned into life in a way that no one, I think, very few people are. That we go through this life with all these opportunities, and all these feelings, and all these people things, and all these amazing occurrences. But probably most of us, myself included, we miss 99% of the things in life. We just go about, do our own thing. We do what we want. We do what the day requires us to do. But he wasn't like that. His frequencies were all over the place. His radio could go from one continent to another, and every single thing in life mattered, and he was tuned into everything, whether it was, the most mundane, or the most complex. He was life. He was feeling every second of life, and so sensitive to every single thing that occurred in his surroundings. I think that what made it really nice to talk to him, because you felt he knew life, and at the same time he knew you so perfectly. There's an expression, I guess, that if you know a person, you can walk in their moccasins. You can walk and feel their walk. But I think when you spoke to Stanlee, you felt like you could feel like what your shirt felt like, your hat, your house, your car, everything. He walked with you every step of the way. And I think something that Rabbi Klein said that really resonated with me was that I think he could walk with people because he never felt that anyone did anything bad. He felt that everyone was the most righteous, best person in the world. And if people were so great and so amazing and so special, why wouldn't you want to walk with them? Why wouldn't you want to learn with them? Why wouldn't you want to teach them and be with them forever? If you love every human being, you want to be with them as close as possible. And that was him. But I guess as the expression goes, to know someone is to love them. And he knew all of us, and he really loved all of us. And of course, he knew his family the best. He spent so much time. He never got tired of conversations. I don't know what kind of hours you guys must have kept, but it must have been pretty crazy. All that coffee you had to drink, all that time sitting and talking. It's funny, the first time I met Stanlee, I was wondered by many things, profound things. But one of my most mundane questions was this: doesn't this man need a drink? Doesn't his mouth hurt? Isn't he tired? Is he going to just have to say, I need to take a break for a second? But he was unstoppable. And I think that's what he was with you guys, He was unstoppable in getting to know his family. I'm sure he was that way before he got sick, and certainly all the more so when he knew that his time was short and his plan in his life had to change a little bit. He loved everyone in his family, the mother of his children, his 4 children, his grandkids, and of course, Shirley. And one of the things he said to me when I first met him was kind of a puzzle to me. He said to me one of the best things that ever happened was that he knew Shirley, and they had been together, been married for 40 or so years. But then he said he had one of his biggest regrets. And one of his biggest regrets is that he did not do something 8 years before. He did not marry her. And I didn't really want to ask him, you knew her for 8 years. It wasn't like she disappeared from the scene. What's the big deal you weren't married to her? But that was his biggest regret. He loved Shirley so truly. He was so devoted to her that I think he felt he had to sign at the dotted line on day one. And the fact he spent a little while to get married, was his regret, because he wanted to show the world nothing more that Shirley was my soulmate and Shirley was perfect, and he wanted to do that deal on day one. One of the things that we became, connected with in particular was a Jewish challenge. He always used to talk to me, but I think he felt like he had to give me like a Jewish challenge. I had to be the rabbi. I couldn't just be the coffee drinker friend and hear his stories, all day, or hear my stories. And I think one of the things that was always on his mind was the upcoming bar mitzvah. I know Glenn, has his bar mitzvah this coming Shabbat. And he came over and he said to me how much he wanted to learn the blessings and he wanted to be prepared for the bar mitzvah service. And we had big plans. We would go over the blessings, have them carefully transliterated, and we would come up with a little speech. And as he got sicker and sicker, we had to put it off. And then finally, when he came to Montefiore, the days were getting a little shorter. We were just ready to do it. He had the paper, he had practiced it, he had the speech, but I think, unfortunately, as we know, the next day, it wasn't the same. He was this different person. But that was his thing. That was his plan, that we would make a beautiful video and that he would be able to present it to Glenn and to the family, almost like he was at the bar mitzvah. He would say the blessings of the Torah, and he would remember the fact that he was a Jew, and it was such a proud heritage that he shared together with you guys. He was so proud. But as we know, he didn't make it to the state. He didn't make it to the bar mitzvah. But for me, I think that the thing about Stanlee is that he was always prepared. He knew time perfectly. His life, his looking at life and time, was better than a Swiss watch. He knew everybody in his world, he knew what they needed it, and he knew when he needed it. So the idea that he didn't make it to the bar mitzvah, philosophically, doesn't make sense to me. There must be something deeper, something going on. And I think that, pardon me if I don't say this right, but from my feeling is that I think he knew everyone in his family. He had it all planned out. He knew that he would prepare and strengthen and build every single person in his family to the point that they could do it on their own. That they knew who their grandfather was, their father was. They could take his life, his lessons, they could take his courage and go on their way, mostly alone. So I think that the bar mitzvah boy, to Glenn, I think he knew that you were ready. He knew that he had prepared you. He knew that he had shared with you. He knew that he filled you up with love and pride, and that even though he would not be there on the bima with you physically, he knew that in every single way, spiritually, philosophically, that you would know that he was there with you. And he was very proud of you. There's so much to say, but I wanted to make sure that I shared, that he was a most brave man. He was very courageous. And, I don't know how he was able to do this challenge of his illness. And we always say that about people. I don't know how they handled it, but myself, with the support of the hospice team members who are here, decades of experience combining of seeing people who are very sick, beating the odds, doing amazing things, that I think he was our hero. He was the person that did everything so perfectly. Every wish, every dream, every commercial that you imagine of a person who was under hospice care was him. Doesn't mean that it was easy, but the idea of doing things you didn't think you could do, that was his life. And I don't understand how he could have done it, how he spent so much time sharing and talking and connecting to people. It's really a medical mystery in my mind how he was able to be as he was. Not only was it a medical mystery how he was able to be, but I don't want to be too analytical, but the way that things went for him in some way, is that we thought that we would lose him 2 weeks ago. We thought that that was it, that we would say goodbye. And, I don't want to put in my judgments and my thoughts, but I can't help but think that Stanlee had a chance to see how we would do. Stanlee had a chance to see, okay, if I were to leave this world right now, how would everyone be? And I think he said to himself that I don't think that I've done enough yet. I think I have a few more things to do. I think they need me a little bit more, and I need them a little bit more. And he somehow came from the state where we thought we wouldn't see him again. And at that point, we couldn't tell you guys how we thought it was so difficult. And the predictions were not so strong of how long he would be with us. We thought it would be very short. But he proved us wrong. And he basically gave 2 amazing weeks to his family. And he gave this family, he gave his friends, this gift of love. That he would leave this world with his blessings and with his stories and with his guidance in the most amazing way. And I think that you guys, all of you here, you gave him his gift All he wanted to do was to have a sense that he made a difference and that he would be with you and that he would give you the courage that he himself had. And I think all these people who weren't scared of his illness and came to him and listened to him and shared with him and went with him through his journey gave him his dream. And that I really, I don't know how to end this speech, but I'll just end by saying one thing, which is that, his strength was remarkable. It didn't make any sense. But I believe he was a courageous man and he created his own strength with God's help. But I believe the reason why he had strength was because the way that he lived his life was that he was intertwined with every human being. That if you know you can't do something on your own, but if you grab someone's arm and they can walk you to where you want to go, you can do it. You do it with another person. They help you to do it. And imagine if you had 100 people holding your arm and you held them back as well. After a while, you wouldn't know who's walking and who's not walking, who has the strength and who doesn't have the strength. And I think that's how I picture Stanlee, is that he walked so many of us through life. We walked him through life so much, and that's why his last few days, his last few weeks, his last few years were above nature. Because it wasn't him doing the walking, it was us, and his family, and him walking together. And I think the reason why I say that is not just to explain the paradigm of his medical situation, which makes no sense, and his strength, but to give us hope that we are so intertwined with this man. He brought us in so close and so tight. He shared with us so much. He trusted us so much, and we trusted him, that I do not believe that we lost him. We lost his physical body. We lost his handshake, but we didn't lose him. That he is inside of us in the most beautiful, strong, and amazing way. And I know he knew that. He knew he had the ability to inspire people and to strengthen people and to give people the gift of love. And I know he was happy and he was strong and he was confident. And I know he's even more happy and even more strong and confident because he knows he did it. He leaves us sad and with tears, but he leaves us with strength and his blessing that we will be like him, that we'll be great and we won't give up and we'll live with every human being intertwined and not let any of our divisions get in the way. So I wish his family well, and his memory should be for a blessing forever and ever.
I now want to call on Stanley's son, Eric.
This has been very difficult for me to write. How do you summarize a lifetime, 88 years, into a few pages, a few minutes of a speech? Depending how well you knew my father, I'll either do him justice or fall far short from describing a unique and special man. Growing up, he was just my dad. My father was born during the Depression on May 31st, 1927, to Dennis and Estelle Freed. He was the youngest of three boys. He came from a working-class family, and I remember my dad telling me when I was young that his father made $10 a week. My dad enrolled in the Merchant Marines directly out of high school during World War II and was stationed in North Africa. He lost his brother Morty in the war. His father died when he was 18, and his mother passed away when he was 28. Fortunately, he had an older brother, Jimmy, who he was very close to until his death at the age of 96. My dad worked hard his entire life. My sister Lauren and I came into the picture in the mid and late 60s. Our parents were divorced when I was 6 years old and Lauren was 4. Dad met Shirley when I was 8, and Lauren and I met the Spectors when I was 10. He and Shirley were married when I was 16, and they have spent the last 34 years happily married. Blending families is never easy, and they put a lot of effort into getting the 5 kids to come together through various trips, holidays, and family dinners. My dad even bought a boat, so he had something to do on the weekends. For all of my father's strengths, the eternal workings of machines were not one of them. For every time the boat worked, an equal number of times it didn't. While offshore and on the lake, we ran out of gas, he dropped the spark plugs into the water, and even managed to catch the engine on fire once. Through all this, He rarely got angry or lost his temper. In fact, I don't remember him even getting angry when Ian was towing the boat home from the lake, took a corner too fast, and launched the boat onto someone's front lawn. This put an end to our boating days. However, all their effort paid off, and we are the family they envisioned. With Dad gone, we are still that family. It wasn't until I got older that I was able to truly see how unique my father was. I know this sounds cliche, but he was genuinely a nice guy. I never met anyone who didn't love him. Some of his best friends date back to his high school fraternity, the Olympians. He's been in the same poker group, meeting every other Wednesday for the past 50 years. He openly gave his heart to these friends, along with a lot of money, I'm sure. He and Shirley also formed the Cousins Club years ago. This group met for dinner on a monthly basis for the past 33 years. These lifelong friendships just give you a glimpse into how he valued these relationships. For me as an adult, I was lucky to watch my dad form these special bonds with his grandchildren, 9 in all. Each one always got his individual and undivided attention. He and Shirley made almost every game, indoor or out, every recital, and every school and extracurricular event. They were there for parties, get-togethers, and anything else the kids were involved in, sometimes hitting more than one in a day. Not only has he been fortunate to see their development and be a part of so much of their lives, but also our children are lucky to have the kind of papa that made a lifelong impact on their lives. However, there's never enough time. Dad was diagnosed with multiple cancer 7 years ago. He courageously battled them and survived long after the time he was given. His ever-present positive attitude pushed him forward, so much so that he never told his doctors how sick he felt, forcing them to work harder to know how he was truly doing. I honestly think his attitude gave him that extra time he wasn't supposed to have. You rarely knew when he was having a bad day. However, when he was, he would just say, "It'll be better tomorrow." That never changed, not even at the end. Near the end, there was a day he became unresponsive for several hours. After some time, he started to respond, and Shirley, while holding his hand, asked him if he needed anything. He answered, "I have everything I need right here." He spent the rest of that day telling us how much he loved us and how he was the luckiest guy in the world. To the end, he never stopped telling us how his heart was filled with love, taking time to make sure each one of us and every person that came to see him knew how special they were to him and how he felt about them. I can only hope at the end of my life I'm as content and my heart is filled with love like his was. This came from a lifetime of loving those around him. For me personally, I will miss our conversations. I generally have Wednesday afternoons off, and he and I would go to lunch at Nick and Smitty's. At first, our lunches were an hour, but as time went on, they stretched to 2 to 3 hours. The last couple of years, I didn't want them to end. I knew our time was running short, and I wanted to extend them as long as possible. He always made me feel positive and better about myself. He ended every conversation with "I love you," and you never greeted him or walked away from him without a kiss. However, I think what I'll miss the most is my nightly phone calls on the way home from work. The minute I got in the car, I dialed the number, and we talked until I pulled into the driveway. Sometimes sitting in the garage until he said, "Well, I'll let you get back to your lovely wife. Tell Shelley and the kids I love them. Talk to you tomorrow." I will truly miss that. So I'll end this with, "Dad, I love you. And I'll talk to you tomorrow."
Stanley's son, Mark.
Thanks, everybody, for coming out today on this reemergent winter day. As you gathered from all these stories, all of us have had a number of years to contemplate what this process and this day would be like. I've thought repeatedly all the ways I could thank him. What was he about? All the great things. I mean, all the things you've heard, I would echo, and they impacted me. They were game changers in my life, the life of my children, everybody that I knew. And often, at the end of people's lives are the times we don't want to remember them because they are so out of character to what they were about. We've all had loved ones, grandparents, so forth, that the last years of their life, the last days, they're not themselves, they're not the people we knew. They're in very difficult circumstances, and you've spent some time in hospice, as we got to spend recently, and you see how difficult it is on everybody in hospice. And for the patients, their loss of pride, it's a very difficult circumstance. So as I'm thinking about what to say today, and in all the ways I've been thinking about Dad, what struck me most poignant was that the best way to think about him was since he became ill, because that was really when he was in many ways at his best. For him, I would say for all of us, and maybe because he was that way for us, it was good for him as well. It was as if he was chosen for that. I'm a big history fan, and I'm always reading history and looking at history for inspiration. And it's like you read. Churchill had a famous saying, something about, for each and every one of us on this earth, there's a moment, an opportunity presents itself. I'm paraphrasing, where we are figuratively tapped on our shoulder to do something great, to lead. To be there, and he coined it, it's, our finest hour. And he said, he further finished his saying, his quote with, and he hopes that when that time comes, whomever it comes for, they're prepared, they're ready to make it their finest hour. Dad surely did that at many levels. How did he do that? In some of the more specific cases, and we've heard some of the ways he never made it about himself, but was always strong. And I go back even further than when he was diagnosed with cancer. Eric and I were at Miami University, and I don't know if it was a parents' weekend or just a weekend they were passing through town, my mom and dad, and they came to visit. It was 1983. And I was at the bookstore on High Street, looking for one of those perfect used textbooks that someone has already done all the highlighting. Someone you hope was very smart, and you could, use their highlighting, which, as it proved, I was not very good at finding that book, as my grades showed. But I'm sitting there looking at a table of books, and he came over to me, alongside me. They were busy looking at shirts, and he said, by the way, they found a tumor in my head. But no matter what, I was due to go to school in Luxembourg overseas the next year. But no matter what, I want you to go overseas and do your studies you hadn't planned. So it took me, we still have not unpacked that phrase, to be honest. To go up to, but that was him. He was, hey, look, I have a tumor in my head. Don't worry, I want you to do the things that are important to you, and this is about you. And he was like that his whole life, but as I said, the things that were pointed for me was since he became ill. And some of them became comical, his ability to try to overcome these things and be there for everybody else. And about a month ago, Eric and I and Victoria met just happenstance at Stone Oven. We had breakfast, and we were reminiscing about some of these events. And we recalled, a couple things. But one of them was when Ian got married, Dad, who wasn't quite feeling well, but he didn't know it, and he was dehydrated, he was maybe a little anemic, he'd had a couple drinks, he fainted on the bima. And that really, what is that emblematic of? That's emblematic of him never wanting to admit that he wasn't right there for you and for everybody else. And he had a number of, to be honest, fainting spells. And Leigh and I were getting married in Israel. He was in Jerusalem. He fainted walking up a hill. which was a precursor to him having a massive heart attack a few months later. So he fainted a lot. And I joked when we had breakfast, I said, if he was a boxer, he'd have a real glass jaw because he was down a lot on the mat. But even better than that is if we carry that metaphor further, as a boxer, he got off that mat every time. And that is a fantastic example, for us, through his illness, to see how he fought. And as both rabbis and Eric echoed so succinctly, he was always ready for game time. And that was very important to him. And so going back to the finest hour, he wasn't Winston Churchill and he didn't save England during the Blitz. But for all of us, that's what he showed us. It was his finest hour when he was under his most pressure, and it was the most difficult circumstances for him, physically, mentally, and surely for the family. And I think that us having a couple weeks in hospice, and all these years of seeing him through his illnesses, the one thing I've been very proud about in our family, and as Eric touched upon, it's a blended family, and I'm very proud, and I know he would be very proud, that we've come together, and at least at this point of the game, I really feel it's been our finest hour. And you can see that in his grandchildren, you can see it in his friends, you can see it in all his children, extended family. And those are great lessons, and you just don't need to use history books for your lessons. You can just look what's right in front of you in life many times. So I will miss all the other great things, the boating, the tennis, all the shenanigans. But the life lessons of the finest hour for me will resonate forever. And it's something, we all will try to live up to, I hope, the rest of our lives.
Stanley's grandson, Travis.
My siblings and I called him Little Papa, but growing up, I only ever remember him being tall. Of course, being small, everything in comparison looks tall. But I don't think that was it. More than a lean, looming figure, Little Papa was a compassionate, well-spoken, and wise role model. He was all the qualities of a man that makes one seem larger than life. There was never a hardness in his voice when he spoke to his grandchildren, and he'd listen excitedly to every single word of our childhood stories about our dates, about our school, about our iPhones, about things we watched and heard on the internet. The internet being a concept he really half understood, and that was on a good day. But he still listened, and then he'd pull his own stories from a bottomless basket, thus sitting in his old basement office, deciphering that brown cinder block he swore was his high school calculator, looking at his collection of presidential pins, his old photos in the war with his brothers, and the one he likes to show where he's all dressed up for his first date. You know that one? He was so open and honest, you felt like you understood him as you would a peer, a very old-looking, far-sighted peer, but a peer nonetheless, and so open and honest, he'd tell them in a way that have you leaving the house dumbstruck with all the things you've yet to learn and all the things you've yet to discover. Papa's wisdom, and that's because Papa's wisdom was subtle and sincere. You never hear him on some Jerry back in my day rant. In fact, all the way to the bitter, uncomfortable end, it seemed he never had anything negative to say. And perhaps my father, my siblings, and I inherited this stubbornness from him, this stubbornness to admit when the weight is just too heavy to bear, when things just aren't turning out the way you really wanted them to. And yet he pulled it off with such grace and contentment, it could put even the most grief-stricken among us at ease. It's because the stories he told, that laugh he'd give in the face of such struggle, was for us. Because he was excited about the future, our future, the future of his grandchildren, and I'm indescribably grateful that he stuck around long enough to have impacted my own. I owe much of who I am, the man I grew into, to his loving guidance and his character. Indeed, he was larger than life. Despite the name I gave him in my own twisted, ironic sense of humor, he was never little. And it's in this way I'll remember little Papa, my grandfather, a kind, intelligent face smiling down on me, the man I looked up to.
O God of life, amid the ceaseless tides of change which sweep away the generations, your love remains to comfort us and to give us hope. Around us are life and death, decay and renewal, the flowing rhythm that all things obey. Our life is a dance to a song that we cannot hear. Its melody courses through us for a little while, then it seems to cease. Whence the melody, and whither does it go? In darkness as in light, we turn to you, the source of life and the answer to all of life's mysteries. Will you please rise now for the El Malei Rachamim? El Malei Rachamim shochein bamromim, hamtzei menucha nechona tachat kanfei hashchina, im kadoshim utahorim kazohar harakim azirim, et Nishmat Daniel ben Shemaiah ben Daniel ve'Esther, shahalach la'olamo, Bala Rachamim yastireo b'seter kanafav la'olamim, ve'yitzror bitzror hachayim et nishmato, Adonai hu nachalato v'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo, v'nomar amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Stanlee Fried, our loved one who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and let us say together, Amen. Will you please be seated? I want to announce that the family of Stanlee Fried will receive friends at the residence of Dr. Eric and Shelley Fried at 29450 North Park Boulevard in Solon. They will receive friends today after our interment service until 9 p.m. and tomorrow, Thursday, from 1 to 4 in the afternoon and 6 to 8 in the evening. Our service will continue now at graveside at the Mount Olive Cemetery. Once again, on behalf of the family, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.